Right. Finally, excited to be here. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming. So today we're going to explore a very important topic of the future of user experience design. My name is Michael. I'm the organizer and also the founder of the company that is producing the event called BeginX. What BeginX is basically a user experience training and mentorship program based on real projects with real social network clients designed to help people break into UX specifically. So really excited to have you guys all here. What I also want to do is give Annie a couple of minutes, moments. So huge thanks to ustwo, who is our sponsor tonight, who's providing the venue. Annie, do you want to?
Yeah. Hi everyone, welcome. Thanks for coming to our space. Appreciate it. Has anyone heard of ustwo before? Oh, wow. Good. I love the UX community. You guys know us. I appreciate that. If you haven't heard about us before, we're a digital product studio. We specialize in design and development, and we work with clients to create meaningful products that have a wonderful impact on the world. We also make our own products. You may have heard of Monument Valley, which we have a huge mural to say that we did that. And if you haven't played the game, it's very fun. And I just wanted to say welcome and thank you guys so much. And if you want to chat with me after, feel free. You can always email me to Annie@ustwo.com. And we have an incredible ustwo on the panel tonight, so I'll let him tell you more about what we do. But thank you guys for coming.
Thank you so much, Annie. So with that said, we will start with a quick keynote from Phil. I'm going to introduce in a second. And then that quick keynote is going to be followed by an actual speaker panel discussion. I'll introduce the speakers in a bit. So with that said, Phil, let's kick it off with the keynote. Bring out the slides.
I was asked originally to be on the panel, but then I thought Ross, who works with me at Google, would actually be a better fit for the panel, so I volunteered to be the keynote speaker. And so I've been a manager at Google for about 4 years, and in that time I've kind of started to realize that I'm much older than the average Googler. So, and I'm starting to realize that I've actually been working in this field for a long time. So I thought the topic, as we're talking about the future of UX panel, it sort of begs of us to think about where UX came from. And so in this very short 5 minutes, I want to give a quick sort of lightning walkthrough of at least my perceived. I know Nitzan was already grilling me about missing some people in my slides, like Alan Kay, but I'm going to touch on some of the highlights, at least when I think back through the evolution of UX and where we got to, how we got to where we are today. So when I think about UX, I remember a lot of psychology classes in grad school and college, and we talk about cuneiform tablets and how they relate to cognitive psychology and how we think about memory and all these analogies that we draw from tools that humans have created to the way we talk about the way brain works and behavior. And you'll see how all of this becomes relevant as I move towards the end. But these are, 13, this is like 500 BC with the writing on the wax tablets. And it looks very similar to a lot of technologies that we have today, which I thought was really interesting. We talk about things like Taylorism. So back in the machine age, we talk about time and motion studies, studying how we can optimize workflows in industrial settings. There was the Toyota production system that was always talked about. There's cognitive science, I mentioned psychology, Xerox PARC, and so forth. So all these things kind of led us to where we're talking about things like machine learning and AI today. So Henry Dreyfus, so thinking also about industrial design. So a lot of the things around service design that we're going to be talking, I think, draw from this sort of discipline. We also have Chapanis, which I think back to my college advisor, who was, he studied under Chapanis, and we always talked about designing these really complex interfaces like the pilot cockpit. Right? So thinking about how do you design for these tasks where users have to essentially sit there for hours on end maybe monitoring multiple sort of mini UIs within this cockpit. And then you think about, Bill Buxton has a ton of literature on this, all the different UIs, right? So we have like, this radar operated with a light gun. All these things, it's crazy to think these are, ideas that were hatched back in the 50s. We have this operator with a lot of like these punch card storage systems, and even like sort of tablet-like drawing on this interface, like 50, 60 years ago. We have the mouse, so we have Doug Engelbart and William English at Stanford, and that led to more iterations at Park, which eventually, as we know, Steve Jobs saw, and that led to the Mac. And then we had the World Wide Web, and then we had things like multi-touch with Bill Buxton and Jeff Hahn give a great talk. I think these slides will be shared, right? So we can share these out, and you can go and watch these videos. But there's all these fascinating things, like Bill Buxton did these, and Jeff Hahn were here in New York at the Cooper Hewitt 2-3 years ago. They gave a really fascinating talk about how they developed these technologies, and that led to things that we see today on our phones, on our tablets. We have people like Don Norman talking about, here he's talking about in the 90s how he coined the term user experience, thinking that human interface and usability were two narrow terms. And he wanted to have us think about all the aspects of the person's experience with a system. So the industrial design, talking about Dreyfus, graphics, the interface, physical interaction, etc. And of course we know the iPhone. I remember I was working at AT&T and we were talking about how are we going to manage the lines that are going to inevitably happen as people want to activate their phones. But that was obviously a revolutionary turning point. Now you have your touchscreen computer in your pocket. And then when I joined Google, we started talking about things like design systems, so making these patterns that could be reusable across all our interfaces, so our users don't have to deal with really inconsistent UIs across different software. So that leads us to where we are today. Hopefully, like I said, I missed a lot of steps along the way, but we're talking about AI wars now, and AI first is sort of how we think about where UX is sort of headed. But if we think about, again, like I said, is where we came from, I think all of these things are leading us towards more natural interactions with our computers, our systems, mainly because we're lazy, right? So I remember, if I had to summarize what I learned in my PhD program, it was that people are lazy. We take the shortest path to accomplish our goals, whether that's Googling it or turning around and asking our colleague where to find some article, rather than actually going to the library. So all of these things play out in things like voice interfaces, where we don't want to even pull out our phone anymore. We just want to talk to the computer. If you've seen the movie Her, the computer is basically an earpiece, and he's just talking to her. And then there's the robots like Atlas that interact with us like real humans, and Waymo, the self-driving car, and so forth. So with that said, hopefully I didn't go past the 5 minutes. I'll turn it over to our panel of experts.
Thank you, Phil. That was an awesome introduction that will lead us to the actual discussion of the topic in more detail. Before we do that, I want to take a quick poll. Like, who do we have actually in the audience? Is there anyone who's already working in areas like AR, VR? Like 5 people. What else? AI, machine learning related things. Just one. Probably change quite soon. What other areas? Feel free to just shout out.
Research? UX research?
Voice interfaces, anybody? Text-based interfaces?
Chatbots? What else? Anyone else designing chatbots? Voice interfaces? Service design?
There's more service than that.
Maybe they don't know they're
We're not
designing.
defining, yeah, we're not defining it correctly.
All right, so that's great. So this will be an interactive panel discussion. Feel free to raise a hand if you have a question. I want it to be as interactive as possible. Of course, we won't be able to take all the questions. We'll have a separate, more formal Q&A at the end as well. But if you have a question or maybe a comment, if you're like one of those people who already joined it, yeah, feel free to chime in. Just make sure you raise your hand. I'll guide the overall discussion. We'll not go online all the time, so feel free to just only chime in when you have some insights related to a particular question, because we want to cover as much as possible in as little time as possible, which is always a challenge. I'll refer to my phone as well, so I'm not checking email or Facebook or stuff like that. I have some questions here. So with that said, what do you guys think are the actual key changes that are coming to the UX field? Hopefully it won't be like that for every question.
Like the key changes? Like, what, can you be more, like which key changes?
Yeah, what do you think will change in like 5, 10 years, 15 years? Anything if you feel like it's something new, like what will change, like at a high level?
Hey, wow, it works. I'm gonna chime in and say, like, I think your response is indicative of something that won't change, or it should, hopefully will not change, which is like a UX mindset or a mental approach to problem solving, which is how do you start to define a problem space and like focus in on what the elements are. So what will change is sort of like oftentimes that's like what you're briefed with or what people come to you with as the problem, and then your job as UX designer is to start to like refine and define what the actual space is.
Some people consider that annoying.
That's kind of the job, right?
Actually, Ross, I apologize. I forgot to do something. Something very important is actually to introduce you guys. That would be useful, right?
I was going to give you that one and then I was going to say.
No, it's good when you realize it now. So with that said, why don't you guys quickly introduce yourself?
So my name is Nitzan Herman. I'm a designer and researcher of AI, augmentation, and language. I work between academia and industry, and I think a lot about machine learning and system design and complexity, and also psychology and mental models and phenomenology of using tools and things like that.
Me, I'm Ross Popoff-Walker. That's my real name. Ross PW for short. I currently work at Google on some of their cloud offerings. Before that, I worked at a bunch of different startups and a few different agencies. What do I do? At Google, I'm an interaction designer on their big data products.
Sorry, my name is Jamie. I am the design director for all the B2B products at Conde Nast, which are the stuff that we build for ourselves to produce and to support all the editorial and digital editorial endeavors, and to be part of the print endeavors and things like that. I've been in the UX design and research and strategy field for about 17 years. I had an agency for a while. Been working for other people now for 4 years, which I really enjoy.
Hi everyone, I'm Dave Fisher. I'm a product designer here at ustwo. I've been in the, UX industry for about maybe 10 years. I studied computer science with HCI in the UK before moving to New York about 5 years ago. I was always super interested in AI and machine learning even back in the day, and I kind of never really found a way to kind of bridge that interest with what I do as a designer. So I have always been researching and reading, and recently, last year, started a meetup called Designing with AI, which is how I met Michael and Nitzan and a bunch of other you that are here as well. So yeah, that's me.
I'm Jess Morrow. I run the UX and strategy teams at an agency in Bushwick called Madwell. Not Madewell, we don't make these. Madwell, it's a normal thing. I guess just out of curiosity, how many people here work at an agency? Like an ad agency or a creative agency? I don't know. Okay, just curious. I'll probably be like a little bit of your like traditional agency voice on this panel, even though I'm also maybe the youngest one here. but got those old school agency Mad roots. But yeah, excited to be here.
Awesome. So now it's much better, I think, right? So now we can continue with that question. What else do you think? What are the key changes coming to the field at a high level?
I mean, I'll speak to something I've seen at least in the last 5 years working with tech companies in general is when I first started about 10 years ago, there was a lot of designing from scratch. We did a lot of kind of research, and then we'd go into a process where we'd like start to design websites and mobile apps from the absolute very beginnings. And if we fast forward to now, there's design systems, and like that's amazing. You know, there's nothing worse than redesigning a button 60 times, you know, 4 years ago. That really sucked. So now we're kind of seeing these design systems come along and let us build these amazing products at a huge scale that we've kind of never seen before. And it's actually really quite mind-blowing to think that if you're sat there designing a design system that can touch, you know, billions of people, you know, like even your most minute decision can actually have a remarkable impact. So that's kind of one thing that I kind of keep in the back of my mind, and I think it will kind of continue going. Like we're not going to continue reinventing the wheel to design UIs and experiences that are kind of fairly common and standard.
I would add to that which the impact, in my opinion, what's going to happen in the UX field itself is that the problems that we're going to be solving are not those down in the minutiae, down in the weeds so far. This is where the importance of like design thinking, the buzzword design thinking, which I'm sorry, I apologize in advance for using it, but that this idea that, you know, where design or design thinking is a shared headspace between, you know, people of all disciplines within an endeavor from top to bottom. And so the reason, in my opinion, in my experience, the reason that's happening is because of these, you know, the open source tooling that is becoming more and more sophisticated, more and more developed, and the patterns that we're seeing that we don't feel urged yet to redesign, and that we're building on top of those, on top of those, on top of those. So the problem solving as UX research designers, people, the problems you're going to be solving are, in my experience, have been more on the business level, more on the larger scale level of things, rather than going down like, what does this button need to do? It's more like, what does this set of componentry mean? What is this workflow? What is the, you know, what's a conversion funnel for this thing, or like whatever, instead of the smaller pieces.
So actually, I want to reinforce what everyone said. I agree with all of you guys.
Don't get used to it.
Yeah. And I just want to add another dimension to it. So I liked how you said, how Ross said about, you know, well, not just like kind of slicing a problem into the ecosystem that it involves, and also not dealing with minutia. So I'll probably add to all of that. I think that a lot of those minutia tasks would be automated. So that's something we should be thinking about. So all those like things like, all the way from Airbnb, put a wireframe under a camera and you got a sketch, to GUIs, to running ML algorithms, you know, for employees on Facebook and I think Airbnb as well. You know, so what that does is that really a designer and a UX person would just need to kind of come up with this schema or the set of mental models to slice a problem and then just kind of send it on its way.
Yeah, I just want to sorry, this is coming out. I just want to second that. I think that's becoming true more and more in some of the ways we work at Google. But I can't be too specific, but part of this is really established design systems like material design, which is very public. But the level of time spent in sort of finessing pixel level details, I think that's becoming much more a domain, like a specific domain that maybe lots of people can jump into, but really having thoughtful considerations and rationale for different design decisions. It's like you spend less time on the details and more about the overall thinking, which I think kind of fits at your point. And so, you know, when Phil was going through his slides about like the history of, you know, human cognition, processing information, HCI, like I think one of the things that probably will hopefully continue to be true is the importance of understanding design principles and like how people process information or understand things visually. That should become more and more paramount, not less.
And I think building on all of those things, just because this is all be one big happy family up here. I think as all of those things happen, as technology changes, obviously becomes more and more a part of our lives, I think we're going to get away from designing linear flows. Like how often will someone, pick up an app and go through every step of the user flow that you laid out? And things like Facebook and Instagram can be second nature parts of our lives. How do you design something? How do you design an ecosystem that supports that? That isn't about following one particular linear flow, but is instead about becoming part of a user's life or becoming part of their ecosystem of things that they use.
That actually makes me think of a question, which is like, so I have been working in consumer product software interface design for a while, and I shifted to enterprise and working on Google Cloud. And one thing that I kind of realized is like the immense focus of Silicon Valley startups, consumer-focused software product startups. It's like all about attention and eyeballs, and like the Instagram thing of like how much time are you spending just going like this. And I wonder with like AI and machine intelligence, stuff like that, is that going to change? Because ideally with like something like Google Home, where Phil ended on a slide of an image of it, you're not spending tons of time talking to Alexa or Google Home. It's like a quick snippet of a moment. So I don't know, I wonder how much of that sort of, that just, we need your attention forever is going to shift.
So I'm going to try not to talk for a while about this, but I really think about this a lot. And I don't know who's technical here, but I kind of reason all of this with a model view controller, which is a server architecture that was built by Alan Kay, Trey Grinskow, and Adele Goldberg in 1978. And I'm cutting to the punchline. It's the only thing we use today. There's nothing else. There's maybe some sub-mutations of it, but the core principle is that all systems today operate on a stationary database and a proprietary interface point. And proprietary interface point, thrives on the fact that we're going to keep you there as long as possible. Where I think what you're talking about, which, again, there's a lot of agreement here. I think we need to start arguing more. But, you monetize the controller, you monetize the utility of the system. So you kind of like when you talk to Google Home and you ask it to order you a cab or get your groceries, you pay in whatever way for that service and not for any kind of attention or any kind of like data monetization.
How does the use case change? Because like it seemed like a really common use case of consumer products is just like, it's almost like entertainment, like you're constantly just browsing through. And if you shift from this model view controller to something else, what are the use cases to focus on there?
So I think that media specifically is probably like a sub-case of that. So let's just focus on tools and products. I think that products generally are probably going to be more service design oriented, because it's less about funneling someone down a chain of behaviors, and it's much more like me talking to you. So, and I really don't want to hijack, but I'll just talk about plumbers for a second. So if you look, if the curtains were up, you would see a building out here, and this building could probably be likened to like Facebook, with servers in the basement and the floor for each feature, and you kind of walk in and look for some ads and maybe leave some data behind and then leave. Right? You kind of have to go to that building whenever you want to use Facebook. But plumbers come to your house, knock on your door, fix your pipes, get money and leave. So a plumber authenticates to your data, can walk on different types of pipes, and gets money. So it's a very different kind of business. It's somewhere between a new server architecture, a new monetization model, and just like an overall different relationship with machines.
So that was the mic drop, and we'll see.
So for those of you following along, there's a guy come to your house, he's going to rob you, and then leave. Soon, in the future. So you're going to need a design for that.
All right. So let's take it back to a slightly higher level. based on what based on what you based on what you were discussing before, some of the key changes you think are coming. Where do you think where the UX profession is heading, and will they actually be important in the future, and why? It's not going to be just nice questions, right? So,
I'm not confident. Just think about there's a website, so how soon my job will be replaced by AI, and you can check for designer's job. And as far as I remember, it's like 60+ years or something, but you can check. So this is another metric to say how does it going to impact design.
Yeah, I'd love to learn more. Maybe you can tell me more.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I can start fielding this question just to give us a full study. So, like, we talked a lot about AI and machine learning, and like no one's really quite sure what AI actually is because it's such a huge field. So, like, one thing that I've started to think about is you guys have all heard of the Amazon Echo that has this camera that can take pictures of you. And assess how good or bad your wardrobe is. I don't know why I just pointed at myself. So like that kind of made me think of what happens if we have cameras built into everyday things that we can interact with, and they can see things and they can kind of start to measure intent. Like, what if the camera in my bedroom saw that I ran out of cologne and automatically ordered a new one for me. So it's just the way in which we'll be able to interact with everyday things is just going to multiply by orders of magnitude and into more natural ways. So like gestures, speech, we're already kind of seeing these things emerge. So that's my perspective.
I always want to jump in. Or
you must have something to say.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Are we talking just automation of UX, or just automation in general of design?
In general, like if you think about all the key trends, I mean, from your perspective, you can explain more from AI perspective or any others.
Well, I'll go. I mean, so we were discussing earlier about the strong definition of AI and what that means and how that. But so we use machine learning and stuff for taxonomy and categorization at Conde Nast because there's an enormous amount of content. And in my experience, and you guys might kill me for saying this, but in my experience, we're discussing a technology. We're discussing and still voice and text and screens, and these are interfaces. In my experience in the field of UX, our work is around humanizing or contextualizing those interfaces. When we talk about AI, to me, AI is a technology, and what I would want to do is I want to contextualize the results of the implementation of that technology, right? So that is the job, that's what I consider my job to do, is to disambiguate the relationship between what the user needs are and what that technology is capable of, and contextualize that. That's my job. So when we discuss, and this is me needling you on the questions, is that when we discuss the future of AI and the relationship to UX is what, in my opinion, we're just discussing a way in which we're going to, as designers, we'll find ways to expose the capabilities of a technology within whatever medium or format or contextual situation we're working at that time. I mean, so in relationship to that question, and I think, so for discussing the future, in my opinion, again, the future of UX in relationship to these technologies, it's going to be a broader scope of thinking. Like if you present me with a possibility that there is a machine learning script in the back where I can just run a camera on my house and it'll categorize and give me labels and everything for everything in my house, and I now have I can send that off to my insurance company, and now my insurance company has a catalog of everything in my house in case I get robbed, and that's all I had to do was run around with a video camera. That's amazing, right? But again, video camera, wow, and there's my age. With my phone, I am running around my house with my phone, and I've cataloged everything, and that's all I had to do, and I get back a list of things and potential value and models and makes and things like that. But it's still my phone. I mean, we're still we're not, unless somebody wants to correct me on that. I know there are people in this room who are a bit more.
Nitzan really wants to say something.
And no, actually, I agree with all of this, and I think the future of UX is probably what we're doing now, and not to be too meta, but the fact that we are discussing, you know, well, not philosophically, but I'll defer to, well, philosophically and, you know what and, not but. So anyway, Brian Arthur.
That was an opportunity for you to disagree with me.
Yeah, but, so there's a great definition I often refer to of the definition of technology by Brian Arthur from Santa Fe Institute, where he says that technology is a phenomena framed in a useful way. So I think the phenomena everyone kind of like captures, like we kind of know, we can discuss or we can limit using human understanding and context what these things do and don't do. But I think the frame is really where it's at. And I think the frame and setting the frame and setting the schemas of thinking about it both from a system to human, a human to system, human to human, and system to system. I think all of that beautiful mess, I think, decentralized, by the way. And also I want to say all of this interoperability nuances, I love those. All of this like not phones, post apps, all that, that's beautiful stuff.
And then I would say the other thing where we have a really big role to play is the sort of ethics and morality side of all of these things. I think that's one of the things that AI isn't going to automate anytime soon. And how do you make sure that you're building a system that doesn't just do whatever it can because the technology can do it, but actually supports the users, the people, and gets back to that email. How do we make sure that we're building the things that we should be building, not just building what we can build, per se.
If I could just throw in one thing about automation, I think that anything that could be broken down into instructions could be passed on to a machine, and if it doesn't lose value for the company, then it will be automated. That's just market forces. So I would say that as designers and thinkers, which by the way should be used interchangeably moving forward, I think, we need to make sure we're not doing things on a single plane, because that's going to make us prone to automation. We could be automated if we do that.
Yeah, so that's a great leadway into the next question. So what do you think are the actually biggest, the folks in the audience, those who are UX designers or the UX field, what are the biggest opportunities and biggest threats that are coming so that all these folks can prepare?
So I want to throw out there that I think let's break UX down into two pieces. There's doing the design work. There's actually like moving stuff around, mocks, or prototypes, whatever. And then there's the soft skills of like working with an engineering team to sort of understand the trade-offs, and we want to launch this feature, but we can launch it in this, like a small size, mid-size, big size, one of the different options there. I really like the thinking part of UX. I think I said this a while ago, but you go on Dribble and there's some really, really beautiful stuff. It's just like, it's freaking artful, beautifully done. But that's completely like on the other polar opposite side from the actual the thinking and the soft skills of it, and the work, like being embedded in a team and working with the team to build and iterate something. And I imagine that what will be automated, or what could be automated more and more, is the actual, and I hope this is the case, moving stuff around the screen. Because let's be honest, we know what we want to mock up, but then when we have to do like 20 mocks and like it just takes hours and hours and hours of moving stuff around the screen, let's hope that's automated. What I hope isn't is like that thinking, the trade-offs, the problem solving. But I will throw out personally in my experience, working in some different agencies and startups, the opportunities allotted to you, or that people provide for you as a designer to sort of share some thinking and direct and sort of provide guidance. It's not very often. A lot of people throughout software or product development industries tend to oftentimes look to designers to just make this pretty or show me where I should place this on the screen. So I hope there's going to be not just maybe a shift towards automation of that, but a shift towards understanding design a little better in a larger sense. my rant.
I have one more comment, which is more around preparation. So you touched upon preparation in your question, Michael. I think one thing that's at least served me really well is to just cultivate a sense of like curiosity and like continued learning, maintaining an interest in things that are new that come out, new developments in AI, machine learning, design systems, anything that you have a particular passion about. That will always serve you well. I like to think about these things as investments. So if you invest time in cultivating a skill or a particular deep knowledge area in business or design or whatever it is you do, at some point it will pay dividends, especially if you can craft your career around that.
So I think that the biggest opportunity, just around technology in general and user experience, is complexity. So complexity science is a whole field of mathematics that looks at systems with soft edges that can't be, that don't necessarily fit into neat buckets. And I love that we talked about Taylorism earlier, and I think a lot of the sentiments we're talking about here is designer as a stop in an assembly line, and I think that's not going to happen. And to your point about companies not listening, I mean, granted, I'm fully aware that what I'm talking about is second horizon. It's not like tomorrow. It's a couple of years away. But those companies are just not going to be around. They're just the forces of the market. So the companies that will be around and the technologies that we will be building with are going to be incredibly nuanced, unbelievably instantiated to each different user that they interact with, radically contextualized, all of those things that require deep, kind of complex thinking. So I think complexity is a really interesting place to look at.
Thank you. So this is a good point. I'd love to take a question from your end.
Hi, I have more of a practical question. So I think a lot of designing successful products is getting people to buy them or to use them. So a lot of people don't understand AI or machine learning and are scared of it. Like, what are some practical solutions that you've had to design against that fear?
Yeah, it's a contextualization, like relevant contextualization of AI as a service or the output of AI within a meaningful context for your end state user. I mean, are you talking about like users of a product that understand that AI is involved in the product?
I'm talking like in media they often sell AI as big scary robots that take over the whole entire world. And so bringing
How do you make it not creepy?
Yeah. How do you make it?
Tell them to change channel from Fox News to something else. Anything else. No, sorry. Someone will give you a real answer momentarily.
I don't have an answer, but I just want to second that. I think that's a really valid question that's becoming, hyper relevant in the sense that many companies more and more have a blanket, check to capture more data than we know about. And what does privacy mean anymore? If it's defined by these companies when we just agree to their terms of service all the time, it's kind of creepy.
So that's a really interesting question for me personally because I work here at ustwo. We're never going to build like a crazy AI. We just don't have the resources or the capabilities to do that. And unless you work at one of the big tech companies where you do have that kind of resource, it's very hard to get an insight into what actual cold-face AI is. So like maybe Ross at Google, you see some pretty interesting stuff. I don't know, maybe maybe you can't tell us. I think the way that I've kind of tried to solve that problem for myself is just try to learn and like speak to people that do work with it and build it and think about those practical use cases and how to demystify it. So like the conclusion I've reached is that we're still kind of like at the learning stage. We don't really know as a population what it is and what it will be able to do, and just talking and learning about it and speaking and coming to these kind of events and just talking to the community, engaging is kind of one way forward.
So that kind of the thing that most people have in their minds when they think about like creepy robots right now, I think is a lot of advertising. And someone say yes, I mean, there's like weird creepy stuff in your phone that can listen to your TV and then be like, oh, you heard a commercial for this product, I'm going to show you an ad for a different product. And I think part of the way of, I should actually talk into the microphone, is that helpful? I think part of the way around that is going to be actually creating useful, meaningful things. Like, no matter what, giving up any sort of information or any sort of data about yourself to just get either spammed with something from a terrible website or like on a horrible mailing list or just something that's useless, like that people are starting to realize that this is out there, privacy matters, I don't want to give that up. And so how can you trade better, I guess? How can you actually make it worthwhile, meaningful, and show that value to them, not just be like, oh, trust me with all your data, I'm not going to take it and sell it to someone else.
I just want to second that and then sort of add on to that, building useful, meaningful experiences, but then also, is there a way for designers to sort of, as the advocates for the user, which we are, to continue to do that by sort of pushing for transparency? So, you know, when years ago, Facebook used to sort of allow you to accept adding an app, and sometimes the app would request permission to ridiculous things and to need like all of your photos and your entire newsfeed. And those things, that information was super hidden. It wasn't really transparent to the user. So how can we advocate for transparency to make sure those things are surfaced in really digestible, clear ways?
So I also want to kind of add, this is not really on the list, anything, but Jay asked me a good question before the event. And maybe you can speak to that a little bit about the role of UX in AI projects in general. At a high level, can you expand a little bit what role and how is that different from regular applications, for example?
So, well, first, just to your question, I'm sorry, I would say everything everyone said, and just building meaningful experiences, and just understanding what the technology does and what it does not do, and I mean, to cut to the punchline, that the brain isn't the computer problem. I would just say that. To the UX question, I think it's all a Taylorism question. I'll go back to that. I think we're building tools like we are industrialists, so businesses operate like industries, and a lot of what we do today hinges on things we invented 100 years ago. So you know, we keep building things faster and more wireless and more shiny and all of those things. And I think where AI is going is kind of going way back to the past and then ricocheting into the future. So to bring it back down, I know I went on a tangent, to bring it back down, it means that rather than designing fast movement in a space, we need to find a way to design volition in the space. So we need to kind of find a way to enable users to write their own, for example, I'll give you an example because I realize I'm talking pretty abstractly. I just spoke to someone today who's in Denmark, who he just did something for Creative Lab, where he teaches the machine to pick up on users' gestures specific to that user. So if your, facial language is different, if your body language is different, and you raise your eyebrow like up here, and someone just like a bit, that's contextual. And that's an example of something that I think we'll be doing. The idea of contextualizing, rather than saying, count 2 centimeters up your forehead, and that's a gesture, it's much more about, okay, let the machine learn the language, and then this is how, as a designer, I want the system and the user to interact.
Anyone wants to add anything?
I really like practical examples, so I'll throw out a couple. So Google keeps doing this stuff that I really like. So there's a website called AI Experiments where Google's published a bunch of things that are really interesting that just show you how not capable AI is right now. But then you also have smart replies in the Gmail app. If any of you use Gmail, that's like a pretty hardcore AI thing. I responded to your email this morning with it. There you go.
Did I ever told you that you picked up on that? It was algorithmically.
Sorry. So what I want to know with the cool people here and yourself myself, like, who's going to write a plugin that's going to tell me when someone has responded using the Google AI? So that I know when I get that email, I know it wasn't you. I just wanted to.
New product idea.
Yeah, I'm sure the plugin that tells you that was used, AI was used recently.
I mean, just to maybe talk about what AI is and is not. I mean, it's really interesting. You know, really all AI is numbers and stats. Actually, I want to say something about opportunities for UX, and now I remember that. So all it is statistics, and it's important to understand that. So we kind of have two pillars right now, because on the one hand we have, what can statistics tell you? So let's say I'm Google, statistics probably tell me the tone I use, or the fact that I use cheers instead of thanks, and that I probably say hi instead of hey, and all of those other nuances, right? That's stats. And on the other hand, you've got a very human, messy, redundancy-aware, the way we think, kind of soft skills part of building a system. So I think the opportunity for designers is to kind of explore that gradient and work with those systems and kind of put the finger on, like, it's a bit of this, it's a bit of that, let's make a special kind of, what's the right shade of gradient, let's say.
And I'm sure we have lots of questions, right? So why don't we take a couple right there.
So I work with a couple, I work with 10 different companies. I work at a venture capital fund. 2 of them, they're business to business. 2 of them are AI companies. So what is the best way? I suspect that with the companies that I'm working with, the problem might be partly that the data set that went into training, the bias from the onset. But I also feel that I need a way to learn more about AI that's not just the word AI, because it's this big balloon that I need to know more about. And both Google and Facebook have training programs, but they're within the companies. So what would you recommend if you wanted a better, smart knowledge of AI? Not to be an AI practitioner, but to understand it better. Where would you suggest going?
So I started this research that I'm doing for some client work, and I just started reading a lot and writing, and then it kind of took my main field of view. So I mean, there's some great books. I mean, you know, there's some organizations that do some portions of it. You know, I mean, I can tell you Andrew Ang from the Chinese company name. It's a great voice. There's a lot of great thinkers, but I don't think there's like one website.
It's a smorgasbord, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I would say that there's just a collection of books that would give you a nice range of opinions. That's probably what I would do. I would probably, to give you an answer. I would probably not commit, not be religious about any one point of view, and just open up to a lot of different points of view. And I actually like your nuanced pushback on just looking at what Google and Facebook research are doing. Because that's very contextual to the type of data sets that they have. And that's not really where the next, when Kevin Kelly says, for example, that you can plug cognition into your systems in a couple of, you can do it now with Amazon, and that's kind of the next wave of startups. That's not, you're not going to learn about it from reading Facebook's and Google's ML blogs, for example.
I'd like to add to what Nissen just said, and I think there's a huge chasm between academia is pushing AI with white papers and all the new research that's coming out, and then what we hear in the media, which is often a very distorted perspective on what's happening in academia and things that Google and Facebook build, and then we have this huge middle swath of people, and the way I see it is it's kind of the role of designers and people that are curious to kind of push the envelope of what they understand and try to kind of turn it into human language that we can all speak and understand, because you're not going to realistically sit there and pour through 60 white papers full of formulas and try and understand that, that turns an emoji into words, right? There's just no point in you doing it. So I think there's a big opportunity there for anyone that's really curious to explain things in human terms, which is curiously what UX designers do.
So do any of you have any book recommendations? If everyone here was to go out and pick one book to start reading, or one blog.
Well, I have to say my site now that you said that. It's everythingwillhappen.com, but not that. But I would say if you wanna. So I think I talked about complexity, and I think the biggest opportunity is understanding the limits of numbers. And I think to understand the limits of numbers and the idea of averagarian thinking, there's a great book called The End of Average by Todd Rose that I recommend everyone read. It's really good. It talks about the lack of like monolithic paths to anything, from education to career, and it talks about origins of Taylorism and Catalay, who got his like smoking tower tore down, and then he had to take math and try and understand the social phenomena that led the rebellion. I can recommend another book if someone didn't like it. But anyway,
do you have another? Another book?
Yeah, I can talk about books all day long.
I mean, not necessarily books, but I think she's asking like more resource, maybe online, maybe little course, I don't know, Udemy course, or like Coursera or something, to basically get a grasp of AI better and understand how it's used.
Well, you mentioned that Google site before. Is there anything else like that? I mean, that one's obviously.
I mean, that's kind of like an open site, so anyone can go on there and submit experiments. I found a lot of value through following AI practitioners on Twitter. So Andrew Ng, as you pointed out, there's a whole host of very bright and talented academics and people in the industry that actually do take the time to write and explain things in a much more digestible manner.
I have one for you guys. Tim Urban, have you guys ever gone to Wait But Why? This site, he like read all the white papers and then wrote about AI, and it's really like he does everything in very layman's terms, so you can really understand, and he has stick figure drawings, so that's always helpful too.
That's a great show.
Yeah, so the blog is called Way But Why. We actually mentioned it in our earlier AI event that we had. It's basically, yeah, there are a couple of long posts about AI there, where he can like synthesize lots of research from like more optimistic, pessimistic scientists, and kind of puts it all together just to understand that. I think it's called like AI, Road to Immortality, or Our Extinction.
I'm just going to, I know we want to move on to other questions, but I just want to jump in to make one point, which is I think we should stop reading books and sharing resources and links. I don't think it's going to help. I know that sounds really, I know that sounds really pessimistic, but just to take the person who asked the previous question, their example, they work with a bunch of different startups. Some of the startups are using AI, and the output is crappy. Like, I think that's a really good opportunity to develop soft skills as a designer, to go to your engineer or your engineering team and sort of say, like, what tools are you using right now? Can you show me how they work? Like, what is the input data? What is the output? Check, and then just like take some time to like just check out some random stuff. You could, for instance, go to cloud.google.com and check out some of the natural language APIs. So there's like, and I'm just using it as an example because it's something that I've been recently checking out, which is like you could throw in some like image assets and it'll process the images and find related sets, or you could throw in text and it'll do like natural language processing. But that then gives you a conversation piece to go back to the engineer and say, hey, I was taking this data and I plugged it into this and I found this. Like, are we doing that? Like, how is that working? Like, some of the best designers that I've ever met are the ones who will try to learn something, fail, go to an engineer and say, can you sit with me for a little bit and work on this together? They develop a relationship and they're able to like do a great project together.
So, I love that we got to the first point of conflict. So I strongly disagree.
Because I said don't read books.
Because everything I described earlier about rewriting schemas comes from rewriting or opening up and having plasticity to think about things in a different way. So you might go to an engineer and do whatever, but both of you guys might be automated in a year and you don't even know it. So it's important to say that, and I'm not saying that, you know, things are we're all gonna be automated. That's not what I'm saying at all. So I'm saying as a vector, I think that it's always better to think than to do. Obviously you need to finish a thought and be productive and make money and all those things. But I think that it's very I think there's kind of an, I think what I'm trying to say, there's kind of an industrialist that kind of morphed into the hacking culture, muscle memory, that we need to start fighting when we get into this kind of long tail environments. Because, you know, for example, just for a second, you know, the metric cycle on an ML system, just one is incredibly long, B, it's very complex. The entire book's written about the complexity of algorithms. So just to kind of think that we can go into a jungle of data and kind of try and debug it and you know, build a different system, I think without acquiring any new taxonomies, I think it's a big thing.
I agree with that, but where like the nuance I think is like if there's something out there that you give it a try and like see what the output is like. For instance, like a machine learning API. Like just throw something in there, see what it's like. There's tons of free open source tools that you can experiment with, and I think a really common thing that will hopefully always stay true for designers who are curious and engaged is that they have a response. You have a response. You yourself put yourself in the shoes of the user and kind of you react to it in some way. And you can react and say like this data just the result is just kind of crappy, or this wow this is amazing.
So maybe just to use what I said about phenomena and frame, that would only debug the phenomena. It doesn't do anything for the frame. So that's probably how it does that.
All right, so let me take that quick idea. There's one question there.
So you spoke a little bit earlier about how interactions are going to get shorter and shorter through voice or whatever because we don't want to be dealing with devices for the entirety of our lives. But I can see this real knee-jerk reaction from brands who are dying for eyeballs and they want you to be scrolling through their feeds and having the brand kind of bleed into your eyes and this kind of thing. And wanting to let go of this kind of interaction. So how can we convince brands to let go of just fighting for seconds, fighting for time with their users, to let go of that mindset and to instead be getting be rewarding or having the users reward the brands with loyalty or appreciation for the seamless experience that the brand gave and that kind of thing, and instead of just like, hey, you're now comfortable scrolling through our feed. Does that make sense, the question?
Yeah, Conde Nast has a whole team trying to figure this out. I mean, they are freaking out right now because of this exact thing that's going on. Because traditional media is, as you know, print is a no-growth business, and to say no growth is saying like that's it's terrifying. And so digital, fortunately, I'm on the right side of history, and I'm on the digital side, and I'm on the B2B side of that. But I'm also real well familiar with we're hiring PhDs like crazy to try and figure out like, okay, so how do we remonetize this thing? How do we change our monetization models? How do we understand our data better? How do we how do we desperately try and figure out how to do it in a way where we're not reliant on constant visual input from people or like distribution? We don't have an answer. I'm just saying, like, this is a thing. Like, we got to figure this out, like, in different ways to interact with people and monetize that interaction. Everyone's trying to figure this out right now. And maybe Google's got to figure it out, but we don't.
And it's also interesting to notice how like Amazon's trying to do this with the Echo, right? So like if you order stuff through an Echo, most of the time you get pointed towards a generic Amazon-owned, like no brand label. So maybe it's actually the concept of brand that needs to change, evolve. Sorry, you probably didn't like that.
No, that's where we're at. It's like experiential, physical. There's a lot of things going on that aren't reliant on ads, serving ads, or they're assuming that people are going to come to a site or an app or something like that. It's exactly that.
Yeah, I think on the agency side, we run into that a lot with a lot of our brands, and in a lot of ways, it's about untraining. Like, it doesn't matter how many clicks you got on that thing if it's not actually converting into a sale. And so, how do you find bits of data or places to experiment to be like, hey, look, we did it here and it worked. Can we maybe try it somewhere else and somewhere else and somewhere else? And I think, sometimes, so from the agency side, we obviously have a lot of people who are like thinking about pushing boundaries, maybe more than an in-house team is, and that's not to say that all in-house teams are like that, just some of the brands that we work with. They're a little more old school, and so how do you help them get to where you are. And a lot of that is about like learning how to talk about things and learning how to explain the strategy behind something, sometimes in their terms. Like learning a little bit of marketing lingo to be like, oh hey, this is how this ties into that thing you care about. So let's try this experiment that I have going. Or let's try this approach, or find a way to do this. Or hey, we didn't even tell you about it, and like, look, it really worked. But I think we're running into that a ton on the agency side, kind of across all of our clients.
Can I just say that it almost sounded like you were talking about like marriage counseling for like, hey, you want to like spice things up and get into something
So much
kinky?
of my job is therapy.
Yeah, I was gonna loop back on the a lot of, I think, as the future, we were talking, looping back to the future of user experience and what the roles of UX designers and researchers within company culture is, and I've found this to be more and more true as, I'm just going to tie this all up really. So as these frameworks in which we're working with become more and more refined and more sophisticated, our time as the UX people, researchers and designers, is spent more and more, in my opinion, is going to be spent more and more on design, on formulating, informing, and growing design culture within an organization to be, you know, the build, test, iterate like idea where your role is going to be less and less pushing pixels around, but and more like through pragmatic academic research methods, providing feedback and data around things that have been shipped or released within organizations, and helping these organizations get a real view into what they're doing, who they are, how they're working, and how to make it better and optimize for whatever their business goals may be. You know, I think that's, as these systems become more and more sophisticated, we'll have more and more time to do cultural work like that.
Yeah, and I think just like Tiny's thing about the marriage counseling, in a lot of ways, these people are right too. It's not that they're dumb and they just like haven't gotten on technology yet. They are experts in their own fields and have years of history in that. So how do you actually learn from that as well? Again, specifically on the agency side, but maybe some of these sort of internal things as well. How do you take that expertise? Branding, sales, marketing, business development, this stuff has been around for forever. What can we learn from there? And what can we add to our world where, you know, we're thinking more about the user and the interactions and the, you know, this other piece over here. So how do you marry those?
So related to that, what do you guys think is the future of screen interfaces, right? So now still the majority of apps, web apps, mobile apps, right, it's still screen-based, right? What do you think is happening there? How will it evolve? Will voice really take over a huge part of it? Or like, what do you think about the future of screen interfaces?
I can take that. So, did I take everything? So I'm doing some natural language processing work with some linguistics now, and I've been thinking a lot about that and how, as a designer, you approach systems that are voice operated, but more specifically on the system level. So rather than just understanding is one thing. But for example, one thing that I got fixated on is the lack of threading, like the way you thread an email. You know, those systems don't have any short or long-term memory, and that's a problem. So I think that rather than, my answer is going to be circular, so rather than shifting, I think, from screens to speaking to devices voice, I think there's going to be a shift in the architecture of systems. So when I said earlier about, I was talking about buildings and all that, and proprietary interface points. You know, let's say we're in ustwo right now, and then we cracked NLP and we know how to talk to machines, it's all done, we fixed it. But I go into a shared space, you know, and I start talking to a room to make me coffee, who monetizes that? Who made that app? That's a problem, because, you know, right now when you go into your phone, it's your phone, and it's your app, and you're associated with your Apple ID. And when you go to your computer, that all of those points are proprietary and guarded and shielded within an invisible fence. So I would say that the shift is probably not going to, we're not going to stop having screens. I think it's going to be how the system, what's the line around those systems.
Can I just disagree with
as long as it doesn't turn again, you know.
Okay, it won't turn into an argument. It's not an argument, disagree. Like, I think what you're describing, totally correct me if I'm wrong, but just imagine like if you open up your device and the app that you have open knows what the state of the other apps are, and it exchanges information. There's no walled gardens anymore, and everything is stateful and personalized. Like, that's what we should have right now. It's 2017. We don't have that. But you know what we don't have as well are just like interfaces that know when I open my phone and music is playing, I want the controls for the music app. Like, why did iOS let go of that? There's just so many basic things that are being overlooked that frankly, just as a UX designer, sometimes it baffles me, and I'm kind of like, I feel like we might get more and more advanced and develop more and more complex systems, but I hope that the basic stuff doesn't fall by the wayside. So I'll just
I mean, I agree with everything you said. But I said earlier that I kind of think about second horizon. So I agree that first horizon. So when I say first, second, third horizon, it's kind of like a McKinsey term. First is now, second, yeah. So
it's now next later.
Right. Yeah, now next later. Yeah, that's
now next later.
So I agree all those problems need to be solved. But I can also reason the fact that we even have a phone that has an OS level of apps and then a deeper level of other apps that are guarded. You know, if we didn't have that, that would, you know, all of those problems would disappear as well. You know, if we had kind of plumber-like microservices that sit next to you, you know, so that's kind of how I'm trying to kind of like approach it from the future back or whatever.
Or the bottom up.
Oh, yes, sideways.
So I guess in terms of screens, not screens, the way I see it is like it's about the thing that you're trying to do, right? So I think specifically in the shorter term, yes, I want to ask for something, I can ask Alexa, or I want to find out information about something specific already. I think I personally don't see the concept of browsing or discovery going away anytime soon. And obviously you can input more of that with your eyeballs than you can with your ears. So, you know, browsing Netflix, browsing the internet, going down those internet rabbit holes. I think that as humans, we like choice, we like exploration. So I think at least elements of that are going to stay on. Whether, you know, we all also have this thing that's like always attached to us and like answering every command, yeah, I think so, like that will eventually happen. But I don't imagine we're going to get away from visuals entirely.
So, so to hijack that again, but I just want to say I think it's a hybrid. I agree with everything you said again. But I think that it's probably going to be somewhere between a really intuitive interface and me asking you, or you asking me what book to read. I think it's somewhere in between.
So, I do think about this, and I love how we're being futurists. All of us are like sitting here like we're in some world, the future of technology, like whatever. But I'll postulate on it as well, just because I read a lot of sci-fi. But so my theory runs along the lines of like human scale and like kinetics and like how, you know, if you look at automobiles and you look at other physical things that we interact with, motorcycles and like other things need to be a certain size for us to feel comfortable with them. And in its relationship to our body size and all these other things. And these are always going to be a factor. So when you say like, you know, the future of screens, I mean, we're really talking, I feel like you're really asking the question about what's the future of visual design and how are we going to look at things in the future, right? Like, what's that going to be? And, you know, we get into this discussion of AR, projecting things in the back, you know, from our, you know, how are we going to deal with things like visually? But I do think like, yeah, a lot of these objects will go away, they'll become embedded and other ways in which we'll interact with technology for sure. But I don't personally, my opinion is that like we will still want on occasion to have a dedicated set of information attached to an object that we're going to want to deal with. You know, like, you know, I know you guys really believe strongly in driverless cars, but they freak me out to no end. But and someday they will become normal for sure, because it's just that's just whatever. But I do strongly believe that there's human scale design, architecture, everything we know has to, you know, and we're going to want to touch things, to interact with things in a way. I'm going to want buttons, I'm going to want pot things, I want to use my hands to do things, to affect them or to change their state in some way. And I'm going to veer off in AR/VR for a second, but a lot of my issues with AR/VR, first of all, I get nauseous, but secondly, like, there's no kinetic response yet, right? Until we have this haptic system where I have feeling around things. If you're asking me to grab something in the air to manipulate something, I'm not comfortable with there being no feedback on it, you know, yet. That could be why my dad was uncomfortable with an iPhone. I mean, maybe that's where I'm at, you know, like, but I'm just saying, like, again, there's a kinetic human scale part of experience, which I don't think we're ever going to get completely away from physical screens on everything. You know, it's something we need to be outside stuff. Feedback. That's the end of my opinion. Sign off.
Ross, I think you wanted to.
No, I feel like there have been a lot of really persistent questions.
Yes. Who's the most persistent question?
I think, yeah.
There you go.
She said her hand like 20 times.
Hi, so I was just wondering, you guys have talked a lot about research, especially in AI, but I was just wondering, how does each of your company, or like your own personal UX experience, has related HRI and HCI into your own UX process? And how is that gonna change in the future? Like, is the relation gonna be stronger between like psychology and UX, or is that something that is not being implemented as much, or what can we do to implement it more?
I'll just jump in really quickly that I think there are like fundamental principles that will be continuous because of just biological human nature, and that oftentimes those are really overlooked. I mean, really basic stuff about, you know, human cognition, how we parse information visually, design principles. Those things are super important, and the more you're able to master them, have them off the cuff as a designer, the more powerful you can be to sort of explain and rationalize your decisions when you're working in teams.
So when I went on that tangent about model view controller and the buildings and all that, so when those guys did model view controller before it got flattened, the basic idea was amazing, and it was matching human mental models to computational behavior. With time it got flattened and boring and all that. But I think this idea of when I said phenomenology earlier, I literally just meant you yourself, you're coming with a certain mental, you know, state into a situation with a tool, and then if you X that with the fact that, you know, the fact that as designers we'll be writing schemas, you almost be writing assembly lines to assemble themselves. So there's a very rich ground, I think, to cover around that. And to your, I think you tried asking more concretely, what does that mean on a day-to-day basis? So a lot of what I've been doing, and also to the not freaking out about AI thing, I often go into companies and beyond, you know, just kind of like ideating solutions and products and systems, there's also a very strong element of bringing it down, understanding it for what it is. For example, that ML is nothing more than putting structure on unstructured stuff. Really, that's like a giveaway. Basically, take a picture with the camera of this room, it will count how many light bulbs, people, chairs, microphones, put it in a spreadsheet, you do good old computation on it. So those kind of...
For the room, do you want to talk about what ML is?
So machine learning.
Okay.
So I would say that I've been personally just kind of taking my research and kind of doing a bit of in-house education and kind of how do you propagate this new, very complex and kind of futuristic thinking to designers, to design when they run through sprints, to sales when they go and talk to other people, and also leadership when they kind of want to think about decisions and things like that.
So I also want to touch on, we don't have a lot of time left, but I want to touch on a couple of other really important areas like AR and VR and blockchain and cryptocurrency in general. Does anyone want to give some advice on like how, for example, designing for VR and AR is different? How would someone potentially get into it and prepare, and same for blockchain? Crypto.
I can say a few words about crypto. That's not something I do like professionally. I've not really done any crazy projects here just around that, but it's something I've followed as an avid interest. I think like all the blockchain stuff we're seeing now, and you know, all this fever pitch about Bitcoin, it's just fundamentally like a different governance model for how people, developers and miners that run systems. how they cooperate together on a distributed basis. I think we'll see more and more of it over the years, but again, it's kind of the same problem as AI. It's so complex right now that the only way to kind of make any step forward is just to try and immerse yourself in it, learn, read, talk to people, and it's really the kind of startups and people that are making like the inroads into what it could finally be, or how it can become useful to a wider set of people.
Thank you. Anyone in the audience? So we had a couple of people actually who mentioned they are doing VR and AR. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how it is different. Any tips or advice you want to provide someone?
I think for the designers out there, UX or just straight up design, I think there's a big market opportunity in learning how to design in 3D space. There's a lot of kind of interior designers who understand how lettering comes up when you look at it from an angle, and all of that is quite well established from an architectural perspective, and I'm sure there's many other fields as well. I think there's a lot of, most designers out there don't really understand how things come out in a 3D space, and I think there's a lot of interesting opportunity there in getting really good at that, because yeah, how does a sign look when you're looking at it in VR at an angle, for example?
Can I just call out two super persistent question askers? The guy in the blue shirt, brown jacket in the back, and the woman in the black striped shirt. I really want to hear your questions.
Yeah. So this isn't going to be an ML question because that's what I work on. So this is a little more tactical, kind of like how we get from here to there. There's a trend that I've been seeing of interface touch points just getting smaller, right? Like on my watch, I have to double click to get some sort of, Apple Pay. Do the same thing on my phone. And it's like the touch points are getting smaller and they're having to do more, almost as a result of AI. They have to be more predictive, which means that they are often misfiring more often. They're more incorrect. We live in a world of greater error states. And I'm wondering if you guys have worked on that, thought about that. It seems like what's missing is the feedback, a feedback mechanism to understand that this is not what I wanted, this design is poor, and there's a couple components to it. Obviously, one part is that the devices that we're using are changing. And then the other side is that maybe there's not an easy way for feedback to come back. And do you think that could be a future role for AI, for UX?
I think that's a super interesting question. Machine learning for error handling. I think like that totally relates to accessibility, making sure that interfaces can be used by everybody. And yeah, I think it's a super good point that like, how many times do you try to use a touch screen and misfire and stuff? Maybe it has something to do with Donald Trump's tiny hands.
It's on, before Jay, do you want to add something?
I mean, so are you speaking about the Apple Watch specifically and the tiny little dots trying to get in there? I just want to understand the question a little better.
Sure. I mean, even in the sense of autocorrect is the obvious go-to, right? That it overcorrects, it overpredicts.
Super entertaining
though. But even in the newer experiences, like with the iOS changes, there seems to be more of a push towards smaller. It's almost like a bar that the tech giants are trying to reach. The tinier the interface touch point can be, the better job they're doing. But there doesn't seem to be any conversation around the disconnect.
I'm just thinking of one context where you have the view all apps on your Apple Watch, which is just absurd.
Yeah.
And so, again, back to the thing I was saying before, which is again my opinion as a designer is that there's a human scale aspect of things, and obviously material design set the standard on like button sizing and things like that. So there is a current feeling around hit area and things like that, and how it should relate to your finger, and again it's kinetic. I honestly am totally baffled by their decision on that screen. Like, I don't understand it. It doesn't make any sense. And somehow I'm always amazed when I actually hit the thing I'm pointing at more than actually hitting. my expected response is to hit other stuff. So yes, it's totally designed. It's of course it could be designed away, but is that even close to what you were asking? I feel like we've walked all over your question.
Well, so you can take it two ways. One, we're either we're in a fad right now, like
most definitely
crazy, or designers have to move into this sort of new paradigm and start to design better with smaller touch points.
Yes to both.
Why don't we both?
Yes, like really, I actually agree with both of those. I think both of those points are true in my opinion.
Why don't you guys, I feel like, why don't I say the next question? Maybe you guys can discuss that in a little bit more detail afterwards, because I feel like not everyone's really into it.
Yeah. So we talked, thank you for the discussion. We talk a lot about how to design better, how to better understand and communicate with engineers, how to understand like our machines, and missing our users. So, and I know that maybe we take that for granted, but my question really is, when you said before, like a great way of approaching design is going in there, trying to figure it out by yourself, failing, and then going to your engineering teams, I said like, oh, okay, so what's coming next is exactly what we do today. We try to understand our users, empathize with them, and then we try to connect with our engineers and bridge the gap between what the machine can do and the user can do. So my question to follow up that is, what's the role of qualitative, human-driven design research in the future of AI?
I think that's very important. I mean, I think everyone in this room is somewhere on the sort of like early adopter, innovator scale of the world, right? Like we live in this tech bubble, Silicon Valley's in this tech bubble. We're all talking about AI as a thing that we might start doing in our jobs as soon as tomorrow. And I think that there are definitely places and people where that's so far removed. And so as we design these things, how do we make sure that we're bringing people along with us? I think that plays into the Apple Watch thing a little bit, you know? You have a bunch of younger hands designing an interface, and you know, a bunch of designers who are willing to work 80 hours a week, probably younger. When do you bring that out to someone who works with their hands and make sure that they can use it? And obviously there's target markets, and maybe sometimes you ignore some of those things. But I think, especially in terms of accessibility, it's not just about the youth or the young people who need to come along on this sort of innovative adventure. And so I think qualitative is super important. And I think in terms of like stuff to learn and skills to build, how do we learn from some of the innovation that's happening in that world, which is really like kind of removed from what a lot of us do day to day. Like market researchers are doing really innovative things to make sure they're talking to the right people. Actually, not all of them, but I think that is a huge portion, and not just for interfaces, but how do we create experiences outside of those interfaces for those people.
So,
I'm like sitting on the sidelines and I want to say to you, like, Ross,
you had an opportunity.
But I think to both of those points, I think all of these things sort of highlight the importance of the qualitative research, the research that I try to highlight in the initial slides. I think sort of one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is like marketing, digital marketing. So back in the day, when we had to run an email campaign, we'd have to work with our IT team, talk to them in the back room, and figure out how to track the success of our campaign. And then now we have all these tools like MailChimp or things like that, right? That let us, as designers, even run email campaigns on our own. So when we talk about machine learning, we say like, oh, it's this thing that only Google and Facebook and all these companies are doing. But those companies are building tools that are going to enable you to build apps that have machine learning. So I think the day is not far off where every UX designer is really going to have to be thinking about these things. But ultimately, it's the human problems that we need to solve. So like Ross said, the moving pixels, or even like figuring out how to do that autocorrect, or and Apple, by the way, doesn't, as far as I know, still doesn't have UX researchers, which we were joking about in the car. So I think like even touch, button, the sizes of buttons and things like that. I worked at NASA, and we had all these sorts of guidelines around the right, the touch sizes, target sizes for buttons on hardware. it's all coming back, right? Like, I don't think, machine learning, AI, it's nothing new. If anything, the thing that I'm seeing at Google is more and more specialization. So we're hiring people who are, focused on privacy, security. It's less, as Ross said, about can you make this beautiful thing, and more about can you solve these hard problems. And so that's where we want to hire that privacy expert to do UX, or we want to hire that person who's familiar with 3D interfaces. So I think it's so I think I went a long-winded way of saying basically what I said at the beginning, which is that psychology and all these things are becoming more important, and pixel pushing is less.
Just a quick follow-up to that. So with this shift from pixel pushing, as you said, right, more towards thinking, do you think the actual number of jobs will decrease? And do you think there'll be fewer thinking jobs and not as many people would be potentially needed as thinking was before?
So I'm not an economist, and there are a lot of very smart people that would pull out graphs and stuff, but I don't. I think if you are fixed on a single plane, or said in another non-forgiving way, if you're a human robot, and if a robot replaces you, then you shouldn't be surprised. Yeah. So I mean, if you're just doing one thing in a very monotonous way, day in, day out. So I mean, I think some jobs will be displaced, but I also think that there are jobs that we can't even imagine. I mean, a lot of people give the example of the Sawyers that made the horse shoes. No one is thinking about them now, right? You got Ford, and now we're talking of, then Ford came along, and now talking about machine vision experts and companies that have bought for billions of dollars for self-driving cars that replace the horses. So I'm just saying, again, I'm kind of taking a futuristic lens on it. I'm feeling pretty good about that.
I would propose this, yeah. I would propose that as software continues to consume our lives and everything we do and everything, that the roles of people involved in humanizing that and disambiguating the human interactions with software will scale in parallel to that. That's my guess. I went to art school, take it for what it's worth.
I'm going to argue a different perspective, which is if AI does lead to these incredible productivity gains in our economies, and we eventually get things like universal basic income, what kind of jobs would people do if they didn't have to worry about having a livelihood? So maybe craft would come back. What would you do if all you needed to do was get a sense of fulfillment out of your life? So I think that's another interesting angle to look at it from, because I really hate this narrative of, all doom and gloom, we're all going to be dead because of the Terminator, which is nonsense, right? It's just not going to happen like that. So I tried to...
Oh, he was saying, I wasn't saying. He said that several times this evening.
What did I say? What?
The Terminator, you're talking about.
All right, we'll take another question.
So, we are in New York City, and in many ways we're at the cutting edge of technology in many things. But an interesting question for the panel will be what is the role of designers when it comes to bringing that 90% of the world that are not digital natives into trying to break it into a middle ground of all these billions of people who are, they haven't had an iPhone for 10 years. They maybe barely are starting to have access to smartphones or general smart technology.
So my mother, you're talking about my mother.
Either
not only yours.
Either more senior citizens or, let's say countries in, it's always that example, but countries in Africa that are growing exponentially, but many of them are barely getting out of poverty and getting access to all these technologies, and they're it's we're gonna have to drag them into the 21st century. What's gonna be the role for us, and what opportunities do you think will be in that?
I don't know. I think the story of how technology permeates society is kind of pretty old by now. It's well established. There's been lots of technologies that have completely transformed the way the world works, and eventually everyone has the use of them. The railroads, the telephone, the road networks, the huge logistics system that delivers food everywhere around the world. I don't think it's going to be any different. I think designers will still have the same role in making things like accessible to humans and paying attention to human factors, and obviously working on things that can kind of bring things down in price through economies of scale to a point where people can afford to have them and enjoy the utilities they provide. I think that won't necessarily change. I continue to feel a lot of times Nissan's definitely got something to say.
So I think I'll probably answer it by try and work in companies, because there's amazing companies right now. The things that are happening outside the consumer market are phenomenal. And I think when we talk about costs and private sector and like Facebook, Twitter, it's easy to forget that we didn't need Instagram before we had Instagram. Just consider that for a second. So there's some phenomenal work being done both in public sector, private to public, private for change, really amazing thing. So I'd say that's one. If you want to stay in your job and not go to that space, I would also urge you, and that's actually just a private brand, I would urge you to ask yourself what's interesting to you. And I think this idea that designers carry a practice is kind of frowned upon. People don't talk about that because they think that you're just a service provider. And I think that's BS. I think that's wrong, because if you're able to articulate what interests you, then you move it from being an emotional baggage to a driving force of what you do. So I would just ask, that's probably what I would say. Ask yourself what's interesting to you, and then if the answer is not what you're doing, then
I want to take a couple more quick questions before we wrap up.
Given the various topics you covered, what do you think is the future of privacy, and what do you think is UX practitioners' role in it?
Future of privacy in 30 seconds. That's like what I love that we didn't do, which I really thought we were going to go off that cliff, was the moral problems, the digital divide, which is what I think he was, which is what he was presenting. The digital divide between, different generations, the advent of technology and how we know it today. And then the other one I expected to come up as well was the future of privacy. So, I mean, I'm not the guy to talk to it. I just wanted to comment on that, actually.
I can answer both with the plumber. Because if you build tools that operate on different data sets and that you own the data sets, all of this it's not a problem.
You, as the consumer, myself.
No, so right now, let's say I build a thing that sits here, and we all spoke, and it doesn't go online. It just does IoT, like machine learning on IoT device, and transcribes it and prints a little thing. That's a system that carries none of those issues. So once we kind of shift, to me it's a system design question, basically. To answer it another way, it's a system design question. I know again that I'm talking to a second horizon, so I might be like circular here because it's not solving today's problems. But in the that's kind of where I see things going. That's kind of my take on it.
But localized data collected and...
Well, two systems and businesses on a money level, systems that don't monetize data, that monetize into it. And I think it's closer than we think, is what I'm saying.
One of the things I think is interesting is that as consumers, a lot of the times we want something for free, and then we also want the privacy. And I think at some point, we're going to have like a reckoning of that. You can't get the freemium game that you don't pay to get rid of the ads, and then get mad about the ads. I mean, I guess you can. But I think that I don't know the answer to that, but I think that there's, we set the bar for apps. Prices for that really low, so then there's only lower to go. And if you go lower, you're giving up something in exchange. So what is that going to be? I don't know what the role of that is, though.
I've got a counterpoint to that. So you're completely right that freemium kind of was the original business model for a lot of the stuff that we saw emerge out of the internet, and I think we all kind of collectively got really drunk off the free aspect of this. And what we're seeing now is like you have these huge tech companies, sorry Rob, they just like exist because they hoard our data, right? And they monetize it and they build products that are based on that data. And at some point I think there's going to be a bit of a kind of a turning point where people won't be happy that their data is being used to peddle this shit at them. Pardon my French. However, how does that manifest? You know, how are we going to be able to extract our data and be portable with it? You know, I think that's a huge design challenge, and it actually challenges fundamentally how the internet that we know works.
Yes. I agree. But I also wanted to point out, like in the topic of future privacy, I have a friend of mine who's an AI researcher as well. And he has a startup which is around the idea of authentication, and the technology, and I can only speak about it in like broad strokes, but essentially the technology runs on your phone and it recognizes your gait and how you walk kinetically, how it understands like your own whatever, how you walk, your kinetics, and so the whole plan of the company is to take the idea of security and privacy, and like, so currently when you go to a bank, you validate who you are. You prove to the bank you are who you say you are, right? And the idea of the startup is he wants to flip it on its head. He wants the bank to prove it knows who you are, right, essentially. So essentially the bank is going to query this thing that runs on your local phone or hardware or whatever that already knows exactly who you are, which your gait cannot be faked by anything ever. It's truly unique to you. And that you would have a device and you would have a secret key or like whatever, and so all these things that we need to be authenticated to, the idea of this new security system is that it would be the bank's job or Facebook's job to like reach out and talk to your thing, go like, is this you? And they would be able to validate that way, rather than you having to prove to it would prove to you that it knows who you are. And I think I mentioned this because it's super out of my field of work and research, but he's a good friend of mine, and I think this is an interesting thing. I have no idea if it will be the future of it, but I love the nature of it, where it's like, it is actually authentically unique. It's not your freaking stupid social security number or anything like that. It's actually your gait, which is better than like biometric. And it's running through AI. It's forcing systems to recognize you rather than you prove who you are to them, which is a very interesting way to think about security.
So this whole topic is really fascinating, and it's really tough to try to fit the whole future of UX in like an hour and a half. Trying to dig deeper, but you know, we have to wrap up at some point. So before we quickly wrap up, I know lots of you guys also asked me about the program, so I just want to quickly touch on that. So basically the program it's a training and mentorship program. It's based on real social impact client projects designed to help people break into UX. And the whole reason we designed it is basically because it can be tough, it can be difficult to start out, even have to obtain some basic skills. Right? So it's because you may not have the connections, you may not like the experience and skills. So basically, the program is mentored and compatible with regular full-time jobs. And basically, after completing it, you become hireable. You boost not just your skills, but also your experience, expand your network. You can learn more on the site, begins.com. So with that said, I hope like if anyone is interested, I'm happy to chat more with you about it. I want to thank you guys so much for speaking today. So round of applause for us. And I want to thank you guys so much for coming, and hopefully this was useful. Thank you.
Thank you.